So thank you very much for joining us this evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have here Lori Milberg, who's a Democrat running for House District 35. We also have Yvonne Lewis Holly, who's a Democrat running in House District 38. And Shane Murphy stepped away. And we have Jim Fulgham. I want to make sure I pronounce that correctly. Fulgham. He's a Republican running in House District 49, and Keith Carlson, who's running as a Democrat in House District 49. So thank you again very much for joining us, and we would like to give each candidate time for a 2-minute opening statement. And why don't we start with Ms. Milberg and work our way down this way.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate everybody who's put a lot of effort into planning this evening. I think it's wonderful that we try to educate as many voters as we can. As she said, I'm Lori Milberg, and I'm running in House District 35, which is northeastern Wake County. I've got about 3/4 of Wake Forest, all of Rollsville, and kind of the northern half of Knightdale, Wendell, and Zebulon. It is one of the redrawn districts that used to be on the other side of Wake County, and Jennifer Weiss was the able representative for many years. But she no longer lives in the district as redrawn, so she has recruited me to run. I'm running because I love North Carolina, and I love this region, and I believe that the spending choices that have been made in the General Assembly in the last several years, particularly the cuts to education, threaten the future prosperity of North Carolina. Our unemployment rate is now one of the highest in the nation, and I think it's imperative that the General Assembly take immediate steps to improve it. And among my suggestions are the following. First, I propose that when awarding state contracts, we give preference to companies that will employ North Carolinians. So our tax dollars will create jobs here, not in China or India or even in our neighboring states. Second, I will fight for tax credits so companies will hire North Carolinians instead of shipping jobs overseas. And third, I will work to strengthen the link between small businesses and our community colleges so the community colleges can dovetail their curriculum with the business needs. Last, but certainly not least, I will fight to restore adequate public funding to education. As our nation recovers from this recession and businesses begin to look around the nation to decide where they want to start up, where they want to expand and grow, one of the key things they will look for are states with great public schools. North Carolina is now 45th in the nation in spending per pupil, and that's not going to do much to attract people to North Carolina. So I will fight hard to restore our funding to education, and I hope I can get your support in helping me do that. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. My name is Yvonne Lewis Holly, and I'm a candidate for the North Carolina House in District 38. And I think what you're doing tonight is fantastic, and I'm thankful for this opportunity. I'm actually one of those rare breeds. I'm a Raleigh native. I'm a native of the particular district, District 38, which is one of the newly drawn districts, and it covers northeast Raleigh and part of Knightdale. I have worked in this community for 35 years in areas of education, youth advocacy, health, women's issues, on a number of boards and commissions, and my favorite, which was working with the YWCA and working with young girls. So I have a history of service to this community. I am recently retired from the state of North Carolina, where I was a state contract purchaser, where I understand the ins and outs of the state's dollars. I was a steward of the state's dollars. My job was to get best pricing for the state in contracts, but at the same time, I also represented the businesses who are taxpayers. So my job was to make sure that the process was fair and that the state fulfilled its needs with as much of as low as possible financially to the state. I know how our tax dollars are spent. I know what programs work, and I have an understanding of the inner workings of state government. Some of the areas that, of course, education. Earlier today, I heard that 4 years ago, a huge investment came from the federal government to the educational system in North Carolina. And those are the students that are graduating today, which has made it the largest graduation class that we've had. Now that money's stopped, I'm worried about the ninth graders that are there now and what kind of effect this will have on them. And those are the kind of things. The other thing is building our infrastructure. Okay, so I think I've run out of time. So I'm
Well,
going
we'll have time for questions, so you'll
Okay.
have plenty of time. And we'll on to the gentleman.
Jim Fulgham, also a native North Carolina, born and raised in Raleigh, and have been a neurosurgeon for the last 35 years in this area. Have also been in the military and have a chicken farm. Have a feeling that the state and the nation need people who've had business experience sitting up there talking and listening and maybe weeding out some of the nonsense that we can sometimes get into with spending money that we don't have. So we have money, we have revenue flow, and we need to make it flatter and fair. We also need to get enough to do the basic forms of government, functions of government, education, infrastructure, and recently Medicaid, and I'll elaborate upon some of that later, but that has become a very, very much bigger item in our budget. Education used to be the number one item in our budget, and now it's much reduced as far as percentage, although the sheer number hasn't gotten that small. I look forward to serving in the legislature, and I look forward to being there, but I have a lot to learn, and that's why I'm here tonight.
And finally, Mr. Carlson.
Hi, my name is Keith Carlson, and I'm the Democratic candidate for House District 49 in North Raleigh. Thank you for inviting me. I came to Raleigh 30 years ago with my wife Leslie, who was in the audience, to work as a software engineer for IBM, and I later worked for Cisco Systems. After retiring, I went to law school at Campbell Law School here in Raleigh, and I'm now a licensed attorney. I have a lifelong commitment to public service. I served as chair of Raleigh's Telecommunications Commission, and I now serve on Raleigh's Environmental Advisory Board. I was a member of the Education Committee of the Raleigh Chamber of Commerce, and I was also chair of the Wake County Democratic Party. I believe North Carolina is heading in the wrong direction. When the Republicans took control of the legislature, they cut over $600 million from the education budget, which meant thousands of laid-off teachers, larger classes, fewer school buses, and dirtier classrooms. I have two sons who attended the Wake County Public Schools from kindergarten through 12th grade, and then went on to college and careers. We owe every child today the opportunity to get the same great education that my sons did. The quality of the schools is vital to the local economy. Our local business leaders at the Chamber will tell you how important the schools are for companies like IBM and Cisco when they decide whether to locate or expand in North Carolina. We've got to maintain the excellence of our schools if we hope to continue to be a magnet for new industries. Both of my sons were fortunate to graduate from UNC Chapel Hill, but the Republican majority cut almost 20% of the funds for the UNC system. Tuition went up again and financial aid was reduced. Fewer young people can afford to go to college, and our graduates end up with more and more debt. If we let our universities go downhill, the jobs of the future will go to some other state. When I'm in the legislature, I'll focus on jobs and education. I won't try to keep people from voting. I won't interfere with women's health decisions, and I'll protect our natural resources.
So in terms of questions, let's start where we left off with the Senate candidates. And you were mentioning jobs, Mr. Carlson. So why don't we start with talking about jobs, and we'll work our way back down the table in the opposite direction. So what do each of you think is one concrete thing the state legislature can do to help North Carolinians get back to work? So something concrete.
One concrete thing the legislature can do is to invest in our infrastructure. We have great infrastructure needs which we're not addressing. The Republicans raided the Highway Trust Fund to balance the budget, so we don't have the money to build the roads and prepare the infrastructure, to build the new roads that we need and to repair the infrastructure that we have already. So I think the first thing we should do to put people back to work is start investing in building new roads, repairing our roads and bridges. That's something we can do on a fairly short time frame and put people back to work right away.
I actually agree with Keith that one of the infrastructure needs that we see today is taking care of what we've already built. Highway Trust Fund and Highway Fund are two separate funds that have been rated legally over the years. It's not just the Republicans have been doing it, but everybody's been taking a dip. Problem that you wind up getting is that you've got crummy roads in many parts of the state that 80,000 miles of roads are not in good repair now. 30% of our bridges are considered to be in poor condition. I don't know how many of you want to ride on a poor condition bridge, but the people up in Minnesota found out how that worked out. So we owe ourselves to spend the money wisely. The other thing is that our corporate and personal income tax rates in North Carolina are the highest in the Southeast. We cannot compete for jobs with South Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, just simply because these states are taking these industries that come in here, and they look at our tax rate structure and said, no thanks.
Ms. Holly?
One of the things that I had, opportunities that I had when I worked for state government and I worked in purchasing contract, was I saw many small businesses. And I worked with them as they got small contracts and they ended up growing and became large businesses in North Carolina. There's a way of doing that, of opening up contracts that will also include small businesses instead of all of the big ones. I think incentives for some small businesses, they're the ones now who are going to be able to hire, and they need help. They need assistance. And some of the programs, I know that the historically underutilized business office works with small and minority businesses in helping them stay strong with advice and everything to show them how to bid and do things with the state. And I think we need a few more programs like that to help the small business, because they're the ones that are going to do the hiring. I'm fortunate enough to have this district that this hotel is in. And I have been going down Capitol Boulevard. I hadn't gotten down this far yet, but been going down Capitol Boulevard, meeting with some of the business people in the district and asking them, what can we do to help you so you can hire and hire locally? So those are the kind of, we need to ask and we need to find out from them what we can do to assist them in this process.
And Ms. Milberg?
Thank you. Clearly, we have to take a multifaceted approach, and you've just heard three things that we need to do. I think something else we need to do that will go hand in hand with that is to actively recruit business. We need to put together folks who know how to do that, who know how to sell our state, who know what pieces of the puzzle that companies are looking for, that can look at the competitor states, and make sure that we can offer a competitive incentive package to companies to get them to come here. I'm a firm believer in offering incentives, but I think we also need to make sure that those incentives come with some accountability. If the jobs don't materialize, or if the jobs leave in a year or two, we need to have the clawback provisions written into the agreement so that North Carolina has a chance to get those tax dollars back, so we can use them to try to get some more business into North Carolina. But again, it's all of these things that have been mentioned are an important part of the puzzle of creating new jobs in North Carolina.
So next we have a question from the audience, and what I'll do is we'll start with Ms. Holly, and then go to Dr. Fulgham, and then Ms. Milberg, and then Mr. Carlson, and sort of mix it up a little bit. So the question from the audience is, what is your position on fracking and offshore drilling? And I just would like to remind everyone that it's 90 seconds to answer questions.
Okay, well, I urge extreme caution. I think fracking, I don't think that North Carolina has enough reserves as some of the other states that will bring in the really big guys to do this, that could do it effectively. We will end up maybe with a B-class contractor who's doing this, and I'm really worried about our water, and more research and things need to be done. Also, offshore drilling, I normally wouldn't have a problem with offshore drilling, except for our coast is one of the most unique, is the most unique coastline in the country. And it's very fragile as it is. And it's also the biggest part of our tourist attraction. So I don't want to trade off one business for another for something that structurally is irreplaceable. So I have strong reservations about offshore drilling, and I think fracking is not necessary in North Carolina at this point. Maybe in 10 years after things have been exhausted in larger reserves in other states, but I don't think it's needed now.
Dr. Fulgham?
The recent legislation to study the safety and the possibility of fracking in North Carolina really reactivated the old Mining Commission. And that was a commission set up many, many decades ago to oversee the safety and effectiveness, principally of coal mining in the state. This commission has been active, well, at least the study group has been active in the last several months and will continue to be over the next few years trying to figure out if this is actually something North Carolina should get into, whether it's good for us economically as well as from a groundwater standpoint. There's no question that there have been reports, and I'm not sure how thorough this has been looked into in the Marcellus areas and some of the Bakken areas, but there are many places in North America that fracking has been done, and that has actually turned out to be pretty safe in most places. But let's just don't do it here unless we know that it's safe for us. Our geology is unique. Some of the geology in North Carolina is very, very vertical and very close to the surface, and this may not be right for us. But natural gas right now is the cheapest form of energy from standpoint of the kilowatts we get per unit, and also has the least amount of CO2 put off from it. So let's just don't shoot ourselves in the foot and say no to everything. There's not a whole lot left out there for North Carolina to do as far as energy production, but there are some energy plays, they say, in the state in regards to hydro and natural gas that businesses want to have to come here. So let's study this carefully.
I think the current legislature has rushed into fracking. I'm opposed to doing this in such haste without studying it thoroughly. The price of natural gas is like all-time lows, and there's no danger that the extraction industry is going to come here and try and get natural gas when they get it a whole lot easier somewhere else. So there's no hurry for us to do this. The price is low. We don't even know that there's that much gas here that would interest the large companies. We also have got to make sure that we protect our water supply. Fracking takes up a huge amount of water, which we've suffered here from droughts at least twice severe droughts in the last 10 years. We can't afford to pollute our water supply with chemicals that they use in addition to the water for fracking, and we don't even know what those chemicals are. We've got to know what the chemicals are. We've got to protect our water. There's no hurry to do this, but the legislature put in place a commission to come up with regulations to deal with fracking, which is dominated by the extraction industry. So we should change the composition of that commission and take a go slow approach on fracking.
And Ms. Milberg?
I agree with a lot of what's been said already about fracking. I think that there's not that much supply. It's a situation where there are a few people who stand to gain a lot, and then a whole lot more of us who stand to lose a lot if it goes poorly. And so it's certainly something we need to approach with great caution. And I have not heard adequate justification to move ahead at this point. So I'd like to there's been so much said about fracking, I thought I might move a little bit more into the offshore drilling issue. I was born in North Carolina. I've lived here most of my life, but my husband and I did live in Houston, Texas for a few years. And when we lived in Houston, I will just never forget, shortly after we moved there, somebody said, "Oh, let's go to Galveston. Let's go to the beach." And I'm like, "That's cool. I like the beach. Let's go to the beach." And we got there, and I thought, what is wrong with your sand? It's dirty. I mean, it's nasty. I don't want to put my towel on it or sit on it. I mean, it's just, I don't think people in North Carolina get what a beach looks like that has been sullied by oil. I mean, I'm looking at the sand going, I don't know that I want to get in the water. It's completely different. And like has already been mentioned, tourism is a huge industry in North Carolina. There's room for it to be even bigger. But if we destroy our beaches, what we have cost this state is just untold. And people need to understand that those are federal waters. North Carolina won't profit from offshore drilling. We just stand to lose an incredibly valuable resource.
So now education was a big part of all of your opening statements. So let's get back to that topic a little bit. What do you think the state legislature can or should do for school districts across North Carolina? And why don't we start with you, Ms. Milberg, and work our way back.
Well, as my background is that I was on the Wake County Board of Education for 4 years, from '05 to '09, and so education is a very big and important topic for me. What I really am trying to get out to the public, when you watch the news and you hear about the cuts, and you talk about $1 million here and $1 million there, and I don't think people really get, what does that mean to the individual classroom? What does that mean to the individual student? And I think if they understood that, the public would be outraged. Just one example of that is that in 2007, before the economy collapsed, school districts were getting about $70 per pupil per year for textbooks. Textbooks cost around $40 in elementary school, up to close to $70 in high school. So it was roughly enough to buy one textbook per child per year. A textbook lasts 4 or 5 years, and so it was enough. It was enough to provide textbooks. It was enough to keep them relatively current. Then they got no funding for a couple of years, and today they get $14.26 per pupil per year for textbooks. It takes the money from 4 or 5 kids to buy a book, one book. And so you talk to anybody right now with a child in school, in high school, and they will tell you their child can't bring home their books because there's only enough for one class set. Every English class all has to use the same book, so they can't read their history chapter ahead of time. They can't bring home their math book with the examples. We have got to do better than that. It is impacting education, and impacting education impacts our future.
As I was saying earlier, that 4 years ago, there was an influx of funds into the state for education. And this year it showed up. It showed up with a graduation rate that we've not had. It jumped 20%, which is huge. And that shows what education can do. And we have world-class universities and world-class community college system here in North Carolina that is strangling and dying. Now, K through 12, of course, we need to educate our K through 12, but we also need to look at our community colleges and our universities. They're part of the educational system as well. I had a nephew that went to Wake Tech for 2 years and still couldn't get English, though he tried every semester because they have so many students and so few English classes that he couldn't get an English class. He ended up going to a private school in order to finish what he started, because he said it did take him forever to finish at Wake Tech. And these are things that cannot happen. These are things that have made North Carolina what it is. This is what made this area so great, is our educational system. So I feel like we need to invest in it. It is part of the infrastructure that we need to do. We need to invest in the schools with teachers and our facilities as well to keep us in the 21st century and the leaders in education.
The question to me with any funding questions, whether it's education, roads, or any other thing the state does, is that you're getting what you're paying for. I'm looking at the data on reading scores. 3rd grade. 30% of the children in the 3rd grade cannot pass a reading exam. 50% of the minority students cannot pass a reading exam. Now, we can talk about outrages about textbooks and crayons and teacher salaries and things of that type. I mean, these are things that we could always focus in on, but that's an outrage to me. And is there a problem? Well, yes, there is a problem, and the question is, what is the educational establishment telling us is what the problem is? Is it teacher competence? Is it student stupidity? What is it? I find that offensive to think that we can move beyond that and any other questions. It's like an 800-pound gorilla in the room. Why are we not able to teach our children how to read? If that is not done at that age, it is almost a death sentence from that standpoint of that child becoming capable of following a career or going to a higher educational level. And it's true for math as well. So the difference between the governor's proposed budget And the final legislative budget, about $20 billion, was $15 million, less than 1.5%. So let's don't go nuts about talking about cutting funding when it really didn't happen that much.
I think there are three things that the legislature should do this year. First of all, I'd like to see them reaffirm their commitment to a free public education system. I think there are actually people in the legislature who want to destroy the public education system. I don't think there's any question about it. It shows up in a lot of areas, but I would say, just for instance, the emphasis on charter schools. How do charter schools differ from the public schools? Well, they pick their own students. They don't have to provide meals. So for poor students, they don't have to provide transportation. They are less accountable than the public schools because the educational establishment doesn't have the means to inspect them. So what you end up with is, on the one hand, segregated schools. Since they don't provide transportation, they reflect the makeup of the area that they're in, and they tend to be religious schools. And I think there are leaders, Republican leaders in the legislature, who want to have religious schools funded by the public. The second thing I would say is we have to implement the Leandro decision. Not so much, this doesn't affect Wake County so much, but there are counties who sued the state a long time ago because they were not adequately getting adequate funding, and they still aren't. So we need to do that. And the third thing I would say is we need to emphasize and fund pre-K education. The latest budget cut 20% from pre-K education, and we need to restore those cuts so that everybody is ready to read and study math when they arrive in the schools.
It seems we have a little bit of a disagreement between our District 49 candidates. So I'm going to ask you to take another 90 seconds to talk about how you two differ in the way that you would approach the education budget at the General Assembly. We could start with Dr. Fulgham.
87% of the students in public schools in North Carolina go to public schools. Well, 87% of the students go to public schools, and 13% go to other alternative things like charter, private, homeschooling. Of the 87%, a recent survey of the parents showed that 2/3 of the parents said they would like to have some alternatives to the public schools. Now, it doesn't mean they might not want to go to the public schools. They want better public schools, or they want an alternative to get their kids a better education. There's so many models out there right now where quality teachers are given the tools to teach their children. Charter schools have done very inventive things with many, many different kinds of models. One of the most interesting ones is the KIPP Academy, the Knowledge is Power program, and teaching mainly minority kids. They take these kids, and 100% in many of these KIPP academies are reading and doing math at the 4th grade levels, where comparison to public schools is disastrous. And they're coming from very similar backgrounds. These children are not incapable of doing that type of work when given the focus. So I've just maintained there's something wrong with the quality of the education that we're paying for right now. And I'd like to see some alternative thoughts come from many, many different kind of people. I'm not the only one that has these kinds of, I resent the fact that we're really not asking those questions.
And Mr. Carlson.
I actually used to be a teacher. I started out to be a teacher. I think the big difference here is we haven't tried adequately funding the schools. I think we need to try and give them the money they need to do their job. And I think Dr. Fulgham his most important consideration is cutting taxes. So if you cut taxes, where does the money come from the schools? So I think that's the biggest difference between this. You know, I think the Republican gubernatorial candidate also talks about cutting taxes, and so where's the money going to come from the schools if we just cut taxes? I mean, that's what is the other side of the ledger? The other thing that was cut by the legislature, there were several programs that were cut by the legislature which addressed preparation of teachers, teaching fellows programs and things like that. we should restore those. We want to have better qualified teachers, and we shouldn't deny them the programs that make for better teachers and, as a result, better results in the classroom.
Since we've been talking quite a bit about education, I'd like to follow up with a round of questions on community colleges. A couple people have mentioned them, and they're certainly playing, I mean, that's really where the nexus between job creation and education takes place. And they're playing a big part of retraining people for new jobs, especially in the down economy. So how can the state support community college programs, and how do you see these programs unfolding in the future? And I guess we'll start, since the gentleman had a little extra time, we'll start with Ms. Milberg and work our way down.
Community colleges are clearly vital to North Carolina's future. We really have a very successful community college system as compared to some other states, but there's always more we can do. It's important that we fund them adequately, that we realize all the potential in community colleges. For some children, it makes college more affordable if they're able to go to community college for their first 2 years of general college and then transition into a four-year university. Oftentimes, that's a much more cost-effective way for them to get an education, especially if they're able to live at home while they attend those first 2 years. It saves them a lot of money, and they'll graduate with much less debt. But clearly, there are other pieces to it. We need to make sure that our community colleges are partnered with our high schools. Some counties in North Carolina are doing that very well right now, and some are not. That's something we can certainly step up. In some counties, high school students have a great opportunity to go over to the community college and get some college credits before they even finish high school. And we also need to make sure that they have the particular programs that are needed for local industry. If we knew, for example, that we had the opportunity to lure automobile manufacturing, we would need to make sure that the area community colleges are teaching the particular courses so that area produces the kind of employees that they want. And there have been some fine examples of cities being able to attract business and keep it because they address those specific needs.
Well, as I was saying earlier, every student that goes to Wake Tech, in particular, because that's the one I know about, has to have English. But if you don't have enough English classes to accommodate the student body that you have, it makes it extremely difficult. One of the things that I did buy was scientific equipment, laboratory and scientific equipment for such programs for clinical lab, SBI training to train students there. And I couldn't buy enough microscopes. And they didn't have the infrastructure to put them in the classes. And the students were dying for the science classes, which thrilled me that it wasn't about the easy classes. We needed to do targeted workforce training. That means let's go out to RTP and say, what do you need? And let's take those programs and train students specifically here at our community colleges for the industry that is currently in the area. And if it needs a higher education, let's target some training in some of our colleges and universities as well for the industry. If they need engineers, let's work on getting more engineers in the areas that are needed. And then those jobs will stay in the area and will be for the kids and students that are here in the area. We do have to do something for the infrastructure, and we also have to work with the students because they're all frightened right now. Their future is at stake. The economy is bad. They want an education, and they're having trouble getting it, and we need to make sure that that's for them.
Dr. Fulton?
I had the privilege of sitting down with Martin Lancaster, Scott Riles, and Phil Kirk about 6 weeks ago and had a really neat session about what they saw in North Carolina, what they saw in the region. South Carolina has an I-85 corridor between Greenville and Spartanburg. It's truly a cooker for industry and education. Their community colleges are kind of taking a ticket from the industries and saying, what kind of folks do you need for us to produce? What kind of skill sets do you need? We're doing a similar type of thing in North Carolina as well, but Greenville-Spartanburg area down there has been actually a higher volume and been more successful so far. They see kids coming into the community colleges, and 2/3 of the high school graduates that do get into community colleges need remediation in English. And that bargain that we have at the community college level, 58 campuses all around the state, none of them further than 30 miles away from any child in the state, is one of the best things we've got going. And they funded that about $1 billion for the last biennium, and that's a good bargain. Think about 1/3 of the cost per student per year that you would pay, the state pays for a 4-year college situation. So, and then the Coca-Cola plant being used by the Wake County folks to do this technical college, they don't want to call it a vocational college, down there, the high school as well as the Wake Tech folks, that is just wonderful. I congratulate them.
We have a wonderful community college system in the state, and it's a critical component of the educational system, preparing people for the jobs that actually exist right now. But certainly here in Wake County, we don't have enough capacity to handle the people who want to be retrained, who want to take classes at Wake Tech. And part of the biggest problem is that the budget cut the funding for the community colleges by 20%. So you can't keep asking the community colleges to do more and more with less and less. It just doesn't make sense, and it isn't going to work. So we need to restore that funding so that people who want to be trained for the jobs that exist will have the opportunity to do that. And we certainly need to strengthen. Wake Tech, I think, is an excellent institution, but I think we need to strengthen the community colleges elsewhere in the state, where the unemployment level is much higher than it is here, and where the poverty level is much higher. So we have a lot of work to do to bring all of the community colleges up to the level of Wake Tech.
So we'll sort of go back to this debate we're seeing emerge between our two District 49 candidates, but this will be for all of you, this question. We have another question from the audience, and the question reads, I appreciate the programs and investments you want to make. Cutting taxes also sounds like a good idea. Specifically, how do you want to pay for all of this? And we'll start with this end, Mr. Carlson, and work our way back down to the ladies.
Well, the first thing that we could do is cap or maybe get rid of the tax break for businesses that was put in by the latest legislature. There's $150, $200 million that was a tax break for business. The first 50,000 of their revenue or income is not taxed at all. So that applies not only to small businesses, which I think is what it was actually intended for, but it goes up to businesses of any size. So plenty of rich people are getting a tax break that they don't need right there. I think, well, certainly the legislature made a mistake also in getting rid of the temporary 3/4 cent sales tax. In their mania to cut taxes, they got rid of something that we really needed, that was put in place during the recession, which we're still in, and should have been left in place to fund education. The governor wanted to restore that tax, and the legislature wouldn't even consider it. But if you only cut taxes, you don't have the revenues to do the things that need to be done. So more cutting taxes is not going to make anything better.
One of my heroes is Harlan Boyles. He's passed away now, but he was state treasurer and talked about where we were headed in a book called Keeper of the Public Purse. He said we would be where we are today with our desires outstripping our revenues. He recommended that we tie revenue collection in this state to demographics, inflation versus population growth. And that was a good idea then, it's a good idea now. What we see is a necessity to look at what's happening to the folks who have to pay taxes in this state. The higher percentage of the lower income person in this state pays taxes to the state rather than to the federal government. It's just the opposite for folks with higher incomes. So any taxes we do in North Carolina in the current situation, whether it's gasoline tax, consumption taxes of all kinds, sales taxes, hit the lower income people harder. And I think this tax reform discussion should involve a flatter, fairer approach to tax collection and also a more predictable approach. The volatility of personal income tax and corporate taxes, particularly with the economy being fairly unstable, is very volatile. By definition, we don't know what we're going to get from year to year. And so having a better fix on where we want to go, whether it's service taxes or retail taxes or whatever, we need to figure out how to make it flatter and fair and more predictable to meet our needs.
I think we need a balanced approach. There's a lot of things that can be done that don't require money. I was raised up with holding a penny till it hollers. And there are a lot of things that you can do that don't require money, that require dedication and service. And I think we need to do those things as well as look at as our whole overall tax base. We need to look at balancing it, making it fair. Tax reform in this state may be something that we really need to look at. I know we need to look at it. It hasn't been looked at in a very long time, and we need to look at that. The bond referendum for Wake Tech that's on the ballot this time is real critical for this particular area, which would provide low interest rate monies for some of the growth that they need. And I think that that's also important in this thing. But we cannot forget our colleges and our universities as well, because they are hurting and suffering. Some of the research programs and some of the wonderful things that they're doing are just being cut to the point that they're becoming ineffective, and we need to keep our eyes on it. Do what we can without monies and look at ways to get more money.
I think funding education is important, and I think the most obvious place to have gotten the money was to have used the money that was instead used to give a tax break to business owners. My husband and I have a small business. We get the benefit of that tax break, and so I know kind of exactly how that works. And the way it works is that every business owner and for example, most law firms, a lot of doctor practices these days are organized such that every partner in a law firm is a business owner. Many of the doctors' practices are constructed that way too, so they are now business owners. And so now for all of those folks, many of whom have a very nice income, the first $50,000 is not taxed by the state. They would have you believe that that's going to create jobs, but paying less taxes isn't why people hire people. You hire people when you have more work than you can do. When that's when you need people. If you can't get all your work done, you hire somebody to help you do it. Just cutting taxes isn't going to make it happen. I would not have any problem with that tax if it was truly for startups, if it was truly for that small, struggling business. But just keep in mind, if it was for that first $50,000 for a company that only made $50,000, their tax rate would be very low. The cost of that tax break would not be significant. The cost of the tax break is high because of the number of people who were included whose income is $200,000, $300,000, and so they were paying 30% on that first $50,000. And so it was not 30% of state tax. It was about $3,500 per person. So we certainly need to eliminate from that tax break the high income people at the very least.
And then the next step will be our last question. So we started out hearing from our Senate candidates on health reform. So now I'd like to address the same question to you all. Under Obamacare, there's an expansion of Medicaid. There's also the opportunity for the state to create its own health insurance exchange. So do you support North Carolina participating in these parts of the national health reform agenda, and why or why not? And why don't I start with you, Ms. Milberg, and we'll work our way back down.
I do think it's something that the state needs to look into. As was mentioned earlier, some of the cost to the state will be mitigated by money from the federal government. However, guess where the federal government gets money? They get it from us too. So I don't mean to play that down. However, the way we're doing it today is not working. Just leaving folks who are uninsured with no choice but to go to the emergency room is a very expensive way to deliver services. It's why all of us pay such a fortune and wait forever when we go to the emergency room. So I do think that it's an area that needs reform and one that we could consider. Honestly, my biggest reservation and concern is will we find providers who are willing to serve this population? My parents are old enough that they're on Medicare, which I understand is a little bit different, but a little bit the same. And I know we struggle to find a physician to address their need. I mean, we look and look and look, finally find somebody who can take them. It's months before they can fit them in. And 6 months later, they go, we're not taking Medicare anymore. You have to find someone else. And if we greatly expand the number of people who are getting these kind of services, I have great concern for, are we going to be able to address their needs? Are we going to be able to find practitioners who will serve their needs? And I think it's going to take a real concerted effort to somehow increase and motivate people to want to serve the folks who are covered by Medicaid and Medicare.
It's not an easily fixed problem. And recently, I had a very, very personal experience. I lost a friend last month who was employed, had been let go from her job. She got sick. She waited too late. The cancer had spread, and we lost her, and we lost her very quickly. And this is someone who was very proactive with annual checkups and all the things when they were available. But the funds were not available for her, and we lost her. So I feel this personal loss, and I understand the people who don't have good access for reasons that are beyond their control. They're not always the people who want to live off the system as perceived, because everybody wants to be self-supporting. It's not many people who just want to be taken care of. I don't have the answers to this. I think we need to look at it closely. I think that we do need to not do a separate state entity, but work with the federal government on setting something up that will address the needs, and try to see and make sure that we still adequately help providers provide for everyone in the process as well.
Dr. Fulton?
Bureaucracy is inefficient, it's impersonal, and it's pretty maddening to deal with. Medicaid in this state costs the state about $3 billion in state taxpayer funds per year. Another $8 billion comes in from the federal government as supplement. You think you're going to get a free ride with this new mandate for great eligibility, you're kidding yourself. 90% will last about 1 year. Then it'll be transitioned to a 2/3, 1/3 match. Now, that's not to say I'm against spending the money that we need to spend for the Medicaid patients in this state. The model that we have in this state is rather unique. It's called Community Care of North Carolina. It's been working pretty well, and we've got 14 different districts in the state covering their entire state. The efficiencies we've seen in treating chronic care, heart disease, pulmonary problems, diabetes, and so forth, in this kind of situation has been remarkable as far as the efficiencies and the satisfaction these people seem to get from having a case manager, a medical home, and things that do things better. I'm in favor of block granting this to the states and let the states set up their own systems so they can control their money and control their activity and take care of their own problems the way they know how.
Well, the Affordable Care Act wasn't perfect, and I'm sure there was a simpler way to do this, to put in a system like Medicare for everybody, but that wasn't what we did. So, but it's certainly an improvement over what we had before. As far as the exchanges go, North Carolina has to put in an exchange, or else the federal government will do it for us. So I think we should go ahead and handle this ourselves. As far as expanding Medicaid, I think that we have to do that too. There's a huge percentage of people in this state who do not have health insurance, and it's much cheaper to provide them with that health insurance, have them take care of their chronic conditions rather than waiting to send them to the emergency room like Governor Romney wants to do. So I think we have to do both of those things, and we will be much better off if we do, and we'll save money.
And that brings us to the end of our program. So what we're going to do is give you each, or the end of our questions, excuse me. So we're going to give you each 60 seconds to wrap up and make a final statement. And why don't we start on this end again with Mr. Carlson? We're just that way.
Thank you for doing this this evening. I think we have a very clear choice in this race. And we have to decide, what do we want the future of North Carolina to look like? Are we still going to have award-winning public schools and some of the best public universities in the country? Are we going to still have common sense controls to protect the water we drink and the air we breathe? Or are we going to go down the path of cutting taxes and giving tax breaks to the rich? Are we going to deny our schools and universities the money they need to do their job? Or are we going to eliminate the regulations that protect our air and water? I believe we must continue to adequately fund our schools and universities so our children get a world-class education and so that our students and workers are prepared for the jobs of the future. I'm opposed to rushing into fracking and leaving the regulation of fracking to representatives of the oil and gas industries. I believe we must retain and enforce the rules to clean up Falls Lake and Jordan Lake. And I believe the legislature was wrong to gut the state's air toxics program to protect our air from polluters. The choice is clear: a brighter future for North Carolina or a failed state.
I think it'd be shocking to Keith to have him understand that I agree with most of what he says. How we approach this is through greater taxes or less taxes, or rich people getting richer or poor people getting poorer. That's not what it's all about. It's behaving in a fiduciarily responsible manner to the people who are forced to put taxes into the public coffers at threat of illegal action. I mean, people have to pay taxes. And as representatives of the people, we should spend that in respecting their wishes and respecting the fact that we need to spend things that the state is responsible for and no one else can do except the state. Infrastructure is a great example. Public education is a great example, enshrined in the Constitution. And public safety are great examples as well. So we do all those things well and efficient, don't waste money, and I think we're all talking in a conservative manner if we do that.
Well, first I'd like to thank everyone for allowing this forum today and allowing for us to express our opinions and answer questions for the community. And I think this has been just a wonderful opportunity for me to even hear where some of the other candidates are on the issue. I think anything that we need to do is we need to listen to the people first. That's what we're going into the legislature for, is to be representative of the people. And we need to listen to the people. We sit at the table and we determine where do we have common ground. And you need to be open-minded. And you need to sometimes compromise to come up with something that will move this state forward. And some of the partisan bickering and stances on some things serve no purpose for any of us. And I want to be one of the people that helps rebuild North Carolina in a more positive way. And thank you for this time. Yvonne Lewis Holly, vote for me, District 38.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure to be here tonight. I really appreciate all of you being here and your time and attention. I've been accused by my opponent of being a tax and spend liberal. And I want to let y'all know that that really could not be any further from the truth. While it's true, I want to spend more money on education. I believe we can do it by reprioritizing spending. In this last, as we mentioned earlier, in this last legislative session alone, there was enough revenue to completely restore the cuts to schools, and instead a tax break was given to some of our wealthiest citizens. I'm a small business owner. I am the person in our business who pays the bills, who meets payroll, the person who sweated it when you see payroll coming on Friday and you're looking at your bank balance on Wednesday and hoping it's all going to work out, particularly when we first got started. So I know what it's like. I know what it's like to start a small business, and I know what small business owners are up against, and I would be the last person to throw up roadblocks, to pass anything to get in the way of small business. My door will always be open. I would take your advice to heart. And I would like to make sure that we work harder to set aside partisan bickering and all work together for the future of North Carolina. I'd appreciate your support. Lori Milberg, District 35. Thank you.
And thank you. And that brings us to the end of our program this evening. I want to thank you all for joining us, especially our candidates, Senate candidates Sig Hutchinson and Senator Doug Berger, and all of our House candidates, Lori Milberg, Yvonne Lewis Holly, Dr. Jim Fulgham and Keith Carlson. And no matter how you plan to vote, please get out and vote on November 6th. And thanks for taking a little time to learn more about your local General Assembly candidates. This forum has been sponsored by the North Carolina Center for Voter Education and the Raleigh Public Record. And I'm Rose Hoban with North Carolina Health News. And thank you very much.